All right, well, good morning, everyone. Just a quick check here to make sure everybody can not only hear me, but also see my screen sharing here in presentation mode. So if somebody might be able to give me a thumbs up here in being able to see everything or hear everything, that would be fantastic.
Hi, we can see everything.
Great, thank you very much. So appreciate the extra time there just to make sure that folks were able to jump in, and I'll continue to monitor that for any latecomers in terms of admitting them. But again, good morning, and thank you for joining us today for our Conservation Innovation Grant training. My name is Brian Zielinski, and I'm currently serving as Acting Assistant State Conservationist for Partnerships and Initiatives out of our state office in Gainesville. As you may have already guessed, I will in fact be your moderator or host for today's call, and certainly going to do my best to keep us on track based on allotted time frame. We do have 2 hours carved out. Our first webinar back on May 4th, I want to say we probably used a little bit less than an hour and a half, but certainly wanted to allocate as much time as we would need there within that 2-hour window. So we certainly will not need to rush, and we'll make sure that we're able to address any and all questions real time. So we do certainly hope that this training will both be useful and beneficial for you, specific to your interest in our state CIG funding opportunity. And in addition to the state side, I will also share a little bit about several of the national CIG funding opportunities as well for your understanding. So before I shift gears into just an overview of the agenda, let me see here. I am going to go ahead and just turn my video off because I've been having some bandwidth issues this morning, but did just want to, again, put the face with the name as far as the introduction. Okay. So as far as the agenda, in terms of flow, we'll have a brief welcome and opening remarks. One slight change here. Unfortunately, our state conservationist, Juan Hernandez, will not be able to join us this morning and certainly sends his regrets. So I will share a few words on his behalf. Then yours truly will get into a little bit more of an introduction and some of the logistics of our conservation innovation grants, i.e. some of the deadlines, some of the details, and some of the focus, if you will, of this year's grants in terms of resource priorities. Then to piggyback on that, we will do a quick overview of resource priorities and concerns, and our state resource conservationist, Nathan Fickert, will take the lead on that. And then we will transition into our EQIP, or Environmental Quality Incentives Program, eligibility requirements, and Ms. Amber Till, our Assistant State Conservationist for Financial Assistance Programs, will take the lead and share more details with everyone. And then as we look to come down the home stretch, if you will, we'll get more into the details of the application process and associated requirements. And we'll have 2 folks that will assist in that regard. Ms. Denise Liggett, our management analyst here within Partnerships and Initiatives. And then we've also got another guest joining us this morning, Ms. Lynn Millhiser, and she's with our grants management specialist position out of the FPAC Business Center. And she'll be able to provide some additional details based on her purview as well, which I think will certainly be advantageous for everyone on the call. And then, of course, I'll go ahead and do a quick wrap up as well in terms of closing remarks. So real quick, just some housekeeping items, if you will. Want to make sure that we do get everybody's name, title, organization, etc. Within the chat box. And also, please let me know if you would also like a copy of the presentation, which I can go ahead and send out after the fact via PDF. Give me 1 second here. Want to make sure my chat box is open here so I can kind of follow some of that as well. And certainly you can utilize the chat box to go ahead and provide us any questions real time as we're going through the different segments of the presentation. And that'll just be one way that you can go ahead and bubble up any questions you might have. You can also certainly just raise your hand, and again, I'll try to keep tabs on that, make sure I don't miss anything there, and we'll lean on some of my other colleagues to keep an eye out as well. And if you are in fact participating by phone only and not utilizing the WebEx platform, you can also select *6 to unmute your line during the Q&A sessions. And I would say, just in terms of trying to minimize or limit any feedback, please go ahead and do keep your lines muted. And I can do that on my end as well. You know, if it looks like we are getting, you know, some feedback or noise in the background. Please also note that the webinar is in fact being recorded, and we are going to make this available after the fact upon not only upon request, but also it will be posted to our state NRCS website. The webinar from back on May 4th has already been posted, and we will do the same for this one as well. And in any follow-up correspondence that I send in terms of sharing the PowerPoint, I typically will include that link as well for easy access. So with that being said, I think that wraps up the housekeeping component, and we can go ahead and move on in terms of opening remarks. Again, unfortunately, our state conservationist Juan Hernandez is not able to join us this morning. Certainly sends his apologies and regrets, but would just share on his behalf and based on some of what he provided in his remarks on our first webinar, I would say I know he's very grateful for everybody's interest and participation this morning in terms of our CIG grants and this funding opportunity. And I really believe it's going to allow us to build off some very strong momentum that we saw last year with our CIG program in 2021, for which in fact we did have a total of 3 awardees. And I know Juan is very much looking forward to building on that in 2022 and beyond. So with that, let me go ahead and dive in here as far as the first segment of our presentation and training as it relates to the Introduction to Conservation Innovation Grants, or CIG. And again, my name is Brian Zielinski, and I am currently serving as the Acting Assistant State Conservationist for Partnerships and Initiatives. So CIG, what is it in a nutshell? Conservation Innovation Grants are competitive grants that drive both public and private sector innovation in resource conservation. The development and adaptation of innovative conservation approaches and technologies in conjunction with agricultural production are certainly a key focus. Note that CIG projects are expected to lead to the transfer of conservation technologies, management systems, and innovative approaches, such as market-based systems, to agricultural producers, into government technical manuals and guides, or to even the private sector. So again, you kind of get the broader scope here in terms of desired outcome based on these innovative technologies being developed and utilized. CIG typically funds pilot projects, field demonstrations, and what we call on-farm conservation research, or on-farm trials. Three main types of CIG, all of which are based on a competitive process, include classic from the national scope, on-farm trials also at the national level, and then of course state, which is where our primary focus is today. So unfortunately, I can't provide much information at this juncture in terms of the CIG Classic and on-farm trials funding opportunities, which again, come down from the national scope. What I can tell you is that last I had inquired about, we were looking at a late spring or early summer notification, if you will, and did want to provide everybody the link here so you can go ahead and keep up with potential updates and or check in on that national site from time to time just to see where we are in that process. But again, unfortunately, at this juncture, I can only give you an estimate on potential timing. And as you would expect, or certainly can see, I mean, we are pretty much right in that slot, thinking about late spring, early summer, now that we're talking about June 1. So I would certainly anticipate, seeing some additional information here any day on these funding opportunities from national. I do see some questions coming in through the chat. So we'll go ahead and I'm just going to hold on those until we get to the end of my segment, and then we will go ahead and circle back. But most appreciate the questions that are coming in so far. So in terms of a CIG overview, and again, some of the high points here to keep in mind and out front as you think about developing a proposal and or submission. The deadline to submit an application is Wednesday, August 31st, 2022. Our state CIG priorities include climate resilience, grazing, soil health, and urban agriculture. And you will hear some more details on those here in a little bit once we transition to the next part of the presentation with Nathan, and he's got an opportunity to delve in to those a little bit more for your understanding. Eligible entities are all US-based non-federal entities, and individuals are eligible to apply for projects carried out in the United States. The total funding available is approximately $900,000, with individual award floor being $25,000 and individual award ceiling being $250,000. In terms of cost share, applicants contribute a 1-to-1 match, and HU or historically underserved applicants may provide 25% of total project costs. Match can also be inclusive of both cash and or in-kind contributions, for example, volunteer work, donation of supplies, facilities, and or even equipment. And then project duration can be between 1 and 3 years in duration as far as total tenure. So in terms of submitting an application, that needs to be done formally through grants.gov. And you see I have the funding opportunity number listed there along with the link that can take you directly to it. And certainly more information provided there in terms of the funding announcement, the requirements and everything that needs to be compiled in terms of submitting an application and or proposal. So up to a total of 10% of funds are set aside for historically underserved producers, veteran farmers or ranchers or community-based organizations comprised of or representing these entities. And definitions for these producer types can be found by searching 7 CFR 1466.3. me see. So do note that grant agreements do not include substantial involvement from the NRCS when carrying out activities. And if selected for funding, of course, NRCS enters into the agreement with the entity or the party. And we are certainly available for guidance and assistance throughout the process via producers meeting eligibility and environmental compliance. But the awardee is in fact expected to take the lead role in project completion. So certainly, look at it from the NRCS providing that support role along the way, answering questions and providing that assistance. But at the end of the day, the entity or the individual is making that commitment, as far as the grant opportunity and the accomplishments and also the reporting requirements. As far as dates and timeline, and those important to keep in mind are out front. Again, as mentioned, Wednesday, August 31st, 2022 is the application deadline. The anticipated selection date is going to be Friday, September 30th. And we are looking to go ahead and have agreements signed no later than Friday, December 30th. And then ultimately with an anticipated start date early next year in 2023 in mid-January. So that kind of gives you an idea of the timeline from application deadline, moving things through as far as selection, and then ultimately award and anticipated project start date. So with that, let me go ahead and pause and let me scroll back up here through the chat box. Give me 1 second. Let's see, got everything. Access. Yep, so we will again be able to provide the recording of the session. We're going to go ahead and post that to the website. I know the recording tends to be pretty good size, in terms of file size. So that's probably going to be the best way for me to share it via link in a follow-up email to our website. And hopefully we should be able to get that posted here within a couple days after today's training. Look here. All right. Okay, does the CIG include aquaculture in its eligible domain? Now, I might lean on Nathan and Amber here. And Tim, I'm not sure if you're referencing more the eligibility side, or is that going to fall under the umbrella in terms of the natural resources scope based on the priorities that were listed or otherwise?
So just to answer your question there, I'm ambivalent about it. The question relates to, is it eligible for receiving support? And I'll be a little more specific since I've interrupted you. Looking at an offshore aquaculture concept that is innovative. But I am certified by the state of Florida as an aquaculture operator. Okay.
That's helpful. Yeah, I saw a few folks. I just was admitting them to the into the call as well. So I appreciate that clarification, Tim. And Nathan, if I might, I know you're going to talk about, the specific priorities that we're looking to address for 2022 and this funding opportunity. But my understanding is that doesn't preclude the bigger scope in terms of innovative approaches and or technology. Would you be able to either confirm and or share additional thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, and tell you what, I think I can kind of cover that when I get to the, the urban agriculture or probably other resource priorities. So if I don't come back around to it and address it, we can certainly raise the question again.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great. And thanks for the additional clarification, Tim. That was helpful. And yeah, so if we don't happen to address it in the next segment here, for which Nathan will be taking the lead, yeah, please just let us know. All right, so I don't see any other questions here in the chat. Oh, looks like we just had one pop up. Hold on here. Let's see, does hydroponic climate controlled cattle feed project quality, small land footprint, no pesticides, can turn 50 pounds of grains in bulk and more digestive and less methane. All right, I may hold on to that one because we're probably going to need to get some more clarification on that. But I don't want to hold things up here, so we'll circle back on that one. Okay, so Nathan, I'm going to go ahead and hand the baton over to you and just let me know. I'll just go ahead and advance the slides on this end when you're ready, sir.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so as stated, I'm Nathan Pickert, the State Resource Conservationist for NRCS Florida. As such, I oversee conservation planning, documenting of resource concerns, how we try to address those resource concerns. And also, as stated, as it relates to CIG, we have 4 broad resource priorities that we're trying to target through this, and that is the climate resiliency, grazing, soil health, and urban agriculture. Now, within each one of those broader categories, there could be any number of more specific or targeted resource concerns under that category, and then practices that would be proposed to address those resource concerns. So as I go through this, I'm going to go over, like I said, the broad categories and some potential resource concerns and practices. It doesn't mean this is an all-inclusive list. If someone has an innovative idea that combines different factors or utilizes different practices or addresses different resource concerns, that's certainly fine to propose. I don't want to make any blatant statements, even like we were just talking about the hydroponics and aquaculture, because it's your folks' job to propose something to us, and then we can take it from there. So I don't want to restrict any possible ideas just because I say yes or no to one certain thing. That said, there are some cases where we would have to make the decision to say this is ineligible or this doesn't fit the program. So with that, Brian, we'll get to the next slide. All right, so climate resilience, the first one I'm going to cover, as we realize the rising average temperatures, changing weather patterns, and increasingly frequent drought, rainfall, wind and storm events, pest pressure, these are all adding up to some challenges in agriculture, and we would love to see innovative systems that help with environmental resilience to these storms and extreme conditions, and agriculture systems that can return to a state of normality following some disturbances. So we are seeking proposals that demonstrate an innovative approach to that. Next slide, Brian. So some resource concerns that could impact climate resilience, air quality, weather resilience, and inefficient energy use, and possible conservation practices would be energy efficient agricultural operations, combustion system improvements, that would be replacing motors on pumps, etc., cover crops, prescribed grazing, and energy efficient building envelopes. All right, next slide. Grazing, here's another one where there are some pretty unique advances in technology and tools that are becoming available. We feel there is a great opportunity here to fast track some of those innovative tools and ideas, specifically thinking about GPS technology, other ways to alter cattle grazing, where they go, where we want them to go, etc. So again, here we're seeking a project that would assist in the delivery of new tools or technologies and strategies that can assist in the improvement of the management of both rangelands and pasture lands in Florida. So next slide, Brian. So some examples of resource concerns here are degraded plant condition, pest pressure, obviously invasives is a big issue in Florida, terrestrial habitat, so that would be our wildlife habitat for all species, but T&E, threatened and endangered species, specifically as well. Livestock production limitations, soil quality limitations, sediment, nutrient, and pesticide loss. And loss we kind of sum up as just any loss of those items from where it's supposed to be. So that could be into surface waters, that could be leaching into groundwaters, that could be loss, just off field and off site to other areas where we don't want it. And possible conservation practices, prescribed grazing, pasture hayland planting, nutrient management, brush management, and herbaceous weed treatment. All right, next slide. Soil health, also referred to as soil quality. This is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. We've learned a lot about soil and soil health in the past few years and how important that natural soil ecosystem is to crops, climate resiliency, like we discussed before, forage production, etc. So anything here that could impact and promote quality soils, healthy soils, and improve soil moisture, water infiltration, soil water holding capacity, any of these proposals that would lead to improvements in that could be a good proposal. Go ahead, next slide, Brian. And so here again, we've got our potential resource concerns of pest pressure, soil quality limitations, wind and water erosion, concentrated erosion. That could be sheet and rill, gully erosion, any organic matter loss, etc. And possible conservation practices of cover crop, conservation crop rotation, residue management, and no-till. All right, and next slide. Urban agriculture, and so this is where probably some of the questions about hydroponics and aquaculture are going to come up. This is relatively new for NRCS to kind of enter into this world of urban agriculture. So as such, we are still learning as well, but that's where these kind of conservation innovation grants are so helpful, because this is a way for us to look at proposals that are maybe outside of what we would normally do, but see how they can still address our traditional resource concerns and help us to promote and improve urban agriculture. So these proposals would demonstrate innovations in the conservation of natural resources in urban agricultural context. So next slide, Brian. So possible resource concerns are sediment, nutrient, and pesticide loss again, soil quality, pest pressure, source water depletion. So that's utilization of groundwater or other water, trying to use that more efficiently, and storage and handling of pollutants, obviously in an urban setting, pesticides, fertilizers, etc. Could be of high risk for loss into, say, sewer systems, rain or stormwater systems, etc. So how those are stored and handled would be very important in an urban situation. Possible conservation practices, integrated pest management, nutrient management, irrigation systems, irrigation water management, high tunnels, and cover crops. Now, as it, again, back to hydroponics, aquaponics, as it relates to NRCS policy. We do have to be able to associate proposals with a resource concern that is tied to the land. That is in our policy. So that's where it gets a little tough with hydroponics and aquaponics. We certainly do have situations where we can tie a resource concern to land with those systems, but in other cases where they're closed systems, we might not be able to. So that's kind of the caveat there. We still have to follow that policy, even though we are in fact obviously asking for innovative solutions to some of these resource concerns. Let me see. Maybe it's time to go to the chat, Brian, and I can get a couple more specifics there. Oh, yeah, let's just do the next slide before we go to questions. So all proposals must address at least one resource concern category listed below. I won't bore everyone with just reading those off the list. But yes, all of the proposals have to address at least one of these resource concern categories.
All right. Well, I certainly appreciate the additional detail and context, Nathan, for everybody's understanding. I know you spoke to the aquaculture and the hydroponic question in terms of, whether those projects would qualify, under the scope of CIG. So I think we're okay there. Let me look at the chat here. Okay. So Tim, let's see. Sounds like offshore aquaculture is a no-go for this CIG. The land issue linkage is sparse. Please confirm.
So, classic answer, it depends. Subaqueous soils and land does count. We can make that link. So it's going to depend on, is there a subaqueous resource concern related to land? So for example, NRCS does do work with oyster restoration, habitat restoration in coastal and marine environments. So there potentially is a tie there, but without seeing more specifics than that, I couldn't say any further.
Can I give you a little bit more info that might help?
Sure, and that's fine. Or we certainly can take it offline as well. I know there's probably a broader audience, so I guess I would leave that up to you. I don't mind fielding the question. You can just watch our time, and if you need to individually get with me, that would be fine as well.
Well, I'll keep it quick. I'm actually in the EEZ outside of state waters, down off of Monroe County, the Florida Keys, and so it seemed like the coverage might not apply. I might need to go to federal funding sources, which is okay. I don't mind necessarily submitting to you folks, because I can just probably, lay that over on the federal effort as well. But it just sounds like this is not one of your critical concern areas. I'll just kind of take that into account and move on down the line, I suppose. Does that make sense to you?
That might be a little too far out for us to have that direct link to, some sort of land-based resource concern. But yeah, I mean, proposals are proposals. That doesn't mean we can't look at it, but knowing that could be a barrier for this particular what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't want to diffuse the work you guys are doing a fine job with the presentation. I really appreciate your time.
All right, thank you. Brian, are there any others in the chat?
Yeah, great follow-up and great question, Tim, on that. Yeah, I want to go back to Gigi's questions here. And I know Rolf briefly touched on the hydroponic climate controlled cattle feed would that type of project qualify? Small land footprint, no fertilizer, no pesticides. Let's see, can turn 50 pounds of grain into 3.5 tons bulk, more digestible, less methane. And she did add a little bit more. Feed project involves algae biofuel, green matter return to cattle manure compost.
So on that one, especially if it can be proven that, hey, this manure was going somewhere on the land and causing a resource concern, and now it's not, or we're treating it, or we're reusing parts of it for nutrients in other places, that certainly could be a tie to a land-based resource concern. Yeah.
Okay. All right, very good. So I don't think I see any others in the chat at the moment. So I guess we will go ahead and wrap up that segment as far as resource concerns and resource priorities. So again, many thanks, Nathan, for that. And for our next segment of the presentation, I will go ahead and introduce Miss Amber Till, who serves as our Assistant State Conservationist for Financial Assistance Programs. And she's going to talk a little bit more about our EQIP, or Environmental Quality Incentives Program, eligibility requirements. Miss Amber, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so the Conservation Innovation Grant Program is umbrellaed under EQIP. And the Environmental Quality Incentives Program has set criteria for eligibility, and the Cig program must involve producers, or pardon me, Cig projects must involve producers that meet EQIP eligibility requirements. So the primary Cig does not have to be EQIP eligible, and all producers involved in a project do not have to be EQIP eligible. But some must be EQIP eligible. In addition, producers are not required to have an EQIP contract. Okay, I'm breaking up.
Yeah, we're losing you a little bit on and off.
All right. I don't have any other options at the moment. Am I still breaking up?
Sound better?
All right. Okay, so I'll start over just to iterate some of the points here, and please jump in, Brian, if you are still noticing I'm breaking up.
Sure.
So Cig projects must involve users that meet EQIP eligibility, right? The primary Cig awardee does not have to be EQIP eligible. So we only need some producers involved in the Cig project to be EQIP eligible. And lastly, participating producers in the project do not have to have an EQIP contract. All right, next slide, Brian.
You're still breaking up a little bit, Amber, but we're able to decipher.
Okay, I apologize. Criteria for EQIP eligibility requirements include establishing farm records with our sister agency, Farm Service Agency, be a person, legal entity, joint operation, Indian tribe, or native corporation who is engaged in an agricultural production or forestry management. And lastly, control of land. So those are three core eligibility requirements for EQIP eligibility. Next slide. So there's a series of certifications, forms that to be processed for EQIP eligibility. So we have a highly rural land and conservation certification. We have an adjusted gross income requirement or limitation, I should say. Producers applicants have to meet a $100,000 adjusted gross income limitation. There's also part of establishing a farm record includes this farm operating plan. And so we have a farm operating plan that could be for individuals and some legal entity, a little more complex. We have a different form. In some cases, there's other eligibility documents that be required. It really depends on the producer and their operation. Next slide.
Amber, you were breaking up a little bit more around the AGI component. And just for clarity, in case folks weren't able to decipher, in terms of the adjusted gross income, on average, right, over each year for a 3-year period, you would not be able to exceed 900,000.
Thank you, Brian. Next slide. All right. I'm just going to circle back to the question, kind of focus on the payment limitation here.
Sure.
So Cig awards themselves are not limited by a payment limitation. So under EQIP, producers are limited to a maximum of a $450,000 payment between a period of time, usually associated with the most current farm bill. So in this case, we're looking at contracts entered between fiscal year 2019 and fiscal year 2020. So what we're just trying to say here is that Cig awards in themselves are not limited by payment limitations. That is a producer. Next slide. All right, so there is something awardees would need to be careful of, which is duplicative payments. So USDA cannot make direct or indirect payments to an individual for a practice through any other USDA program. So if the producer was participating in EQIP and also participating in Cig, and the payments were associated with the same practice, that could be considered a duplicate payment. There are programs under USDA such as Conservation Reserve Program and CSP. Next slide. All right, a grantee would need to certify requirement of EQIP eligibility. So in a semi-annual product report, they would need to provide a list of all EQIP producers involved in the project, the dollar amount, any payments made those individual producers or entities, and self-certification indicating that individuals receiving those payments are compliant with eligibility requirements. Next slide. All right, so I did see a question come in, Brian.
Yes, I did as well. Let's see here. Looks like that came in from GG. What is EQIP versus CIG?
The Environmental Incentives Program is a program that Cig is umbrellaed under. So Cig funding is sourced from EQIP. Cig is a program that is interested in new technology that producers could adopt. In some cases, producers could adopt them as part of a EQIP contract. So EQIP contracts are directed to a producer, and Cig is directed to an awardee to explore what is proposed in their proposal. And I would be happy to any additional input, Brian or Nathan, on that area.
I think that from my standpoint, I think that hit the highlights, Amber. And, you know, Gigi, if that leads you to more questions, then yeah, certainly no problem. We can follow up after the fact as well, just to keep our flow here and keep things moving. But great question, and certainly appreciate you bubbling that up in the chat. All right, I don't see anything else in the chat. So Amber, thank you very much, and appreciate you fighting through some of the techno difficulties there. But I think we were definitely able to get the baseline in terms of what was shared, especially, you know, in conjunction with what was on the slides, and we can handle any additional follow-up as needed. And of course, you know, I will be able, like I said, to make this presentation available and share after the fact. So I know that will be helpful as well in terms of, you know, connecting the dots. So thanks again, Miss Amber. And with that, we will go ahead and transition to our next segment, specific to application process and requirements. And to share some more of those details, we're going to have a little bit of a tag team approach here from Ms. Denise Liggett, who again, she is our management analyst within partnerships and initiatives here out of our state office in Gainesville. And then Lynn Millhiser, who is a grants management specialist out of our FPAC Business Center. So Ms. Denise, I will officially hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And yes, I'm going to go over some of the steps here in the application process. So the notice of funding opportunity, just want to point out, if you're looking for a copy of it, if you go to the grants.gov website and enter the notice of funding opportunity number in the top right-hand corner in the search box, it will come up. You can click on related documents, and then from there you can actually pull up a PDF version where you can print or view on screen. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to go over the steps in the application process. So we're going to, in the next few slides, so this is just a summary of that. We're going to talk about the account registration through grants.gov, the actual applying for the opportunity, and then the actual contents of what should be included in your application submission, and finally the application forms that are required. Next slide, please. So I can't stress enough to start the process early. You have to have a grants.gov account to apply for the state CIG, and there are several steps to set up this account. And it can take a couple of weeks to get everything set up just to be able to get started on your application. So, and then finally, I want to, on this slide, just point out that Florida NRCS cannot assist with any technical issues. When it comes to grants.gov, you would need to direct those questions to the 800 number or the email address there on your screen. Next slide, please. Okay, so the steps to register. So the view here of the grants.gov site here under applications, organization registration, has a link to what's called the System for Award Management, or SAM, as we call it. So in order to obtain a grants.gov login, you must have a unique entity ID, and that ID is obtained through registering through the SAM website. And there's a link there on that page to the SAM.gov site. So the registration can take 7 to 10 business days to be approved. And once that is final, then you will be able to register for a grants.gov login, and that will happen on the same day. But that's stressing the importance of getting started early on this. And then once you get that in your grants.gov login, as part of your registration, you'll be adding your organization applicant profile, and finally setting up your point of contact authorized profile roles. So that would be those that are developing, reviewing, and signing the proposal. Next slide, please, Brian. And then you'll want to create a workspace or set up a workspace. And this is a shared online environment where members of the grant team will simultaneously access and edit different web forms within the application. So creating a workspace allows you all to complete the application online and route it through your organization for review before submitting. An application may be submitted through Workspace. You'll click the Sign and Submit button on the Manage Workspace page under the Forms tab. Grants.gov recommends at least 24 hours in advance to submit 24 hours in advance prior to the closing date, just to allow for any potential technical issues that you may encounter. And once you're submitted, the application will be given a number, and that can be used for tracking the status of the submission. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is where we're going to get into the content and form of the application submission. So on your cover page, which should be one page, you'll want to include applicant name, project title, funds, federal funds being requested, and the amount of matching funds or non-federal funds, various contacts, and a brief description of the project. The abstract is a way to describe in non-technical terms the issues you are looking to address, the objective, the innovative approach, and main deliverables provided, and most importantly, how success will be evaluated. And the project narrative, up to 15 pages. This is this detailed information about the project, design, goals and objectives, proposed outcomes, benefits, and estimate of eligible producers if they have been identified. Team qualifications. So we don't want resumes. We're looking for more of what the team members involved backgrounds or contributions will be towards the project. Assessment of our environmental impacts. So depending on the types of activities you are proposing, identify protected environmental impacts, what those will be. Because this is federal funding, activities are subject to the National Environmental Protection Act, or NEPA. NRCS is required to do environmental assessments for CIG, particularly if the ground disturbing activity is going on. So you should cover this in your application so we'll know what those environmental impacts may be. Declaration of previous CIG project involvement, past performance, and then a declaration of historically underserved and veteran farmers or ranchers. If applying under these categories, then a declaration is required. And there is an example of this in the Notice of Funding Opportunity of what the declaration would look like. Next slide, please. Okay, the application forms can be found online on the grants.gov under forms, the SF424 family, the 424 application for federal assistance, and the 424A budget information, as well as instructions on how to complete these forms. You'll also we'll have to include a budget table, which is more of an Excel spreadsheet outlining the budget, and then a budget narrative to coincide with that budget spreadsheet. So the Notice of Funding Opportunity also has examples of what these would look like at the end of the opportunity announcement. But the budget narrative will cover both the federal funds and the matching funds and how they will be utilized. If applicable, a combination of cash and in-kind contributions, but the cost share must be committed at the time of application via a letter outlining the exact dollar amount. So that would be the commitment letters. Negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, if applicable. It must be active to be considered and must be attached at the time of application. If you have a de minimis cost share agreement in place, which is 10% cost rate, a copy of that should be included. And finally, there is an opportunity to ask for a de minimis cost rate, and this would have to be requested as part of your application package. Letters of support for the project from individuals or entities that are not project partners may be submitted and should be placed at the end of your application. And there's many examples of these documents that can be found at the end of the notice of funding opportunity. So I think that covers most of it, but I would like at this time to introduce Ms. Lynn Millhiser. She is the Grants Management Specialist from the Farm Production and Conservation Business Center. Lynn?
Yeah, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. So just a few things to support what Denise and others have talked about. Your application will be submitted, must be submitted through grants.gov. And it can only be submitted through grants.gov. There is no other way to submit for this particular state CIG program. If you have issues with registering in sam.gov, which takes a couple of weeks, sometimes longer, but do that immediately. You'll need that number in order to actually do the workspace in grants.gov to submit the application. In the grants.gov NOFO package, you will see related documents is the full announcement, which gives you the full boat, and you should read that carefully, the full boat on what this project is targeting, what this award or program is targeting, this funding stream, you know, how you're eligible, what your project is to be eligible, that kind of information is in there. So encourage you to read that carefully. But in addition to the full announcement, and Denise alluded to it, there are some attachments in that NOFO package. So they have appendices A through D in addition to the full announcement. And take a look at those. Those are intended as tools to help you draft an eligible application. Eligible and complete are key words. So there is an application package checklist to help you pull together all of the pieces that are required to apply. There is an extensive budget narrative guidance document, and you definitely want to read that carefully because that's going to help you detail and quantify your budget narrative. Which is key. We have to be able to understand the budget narrative and follow its quantifications for personnel, for fringe, for supplies, for equipment, for whatever you might include in there under eligible categories. Has to be quantified and detailed enough that we can follow that pretty precisely. There is also a sample commitment letter. So if you are receiving match funds or support funds from others, there's a sample commitment letter for them to sign to indicate their commitment of funding to your project. And then lastly, Appendix D is instructions to help you fill out that SF 424 and SF 424A form. So you'll want to take a look at those instructions, at least as a guide. What's key when you're applying is that your budget narrative document, again, which is your detailed quantified document by line item category, that budget narrative, the SF 424 amounts and dates, the project dates, the SF 424A line item categories and amounts must all match at time of application submission. So they all have to be in alignment for dates, for amounts, for line items. Everything has to work pretty smoothly. All has to be aligned, because once you apply in grants.gov and Florida staff review and select the projects to be funded, then it comes to the FPAC Business Center. And if those things are not in alignment, it gets sent back to the Florida state office to work with you again to get these things in proper alignment. So if you do a good job at the outset, it's clean, it's clear, and that's the best way to move forward. And then lastly, my last comment would be if you've never had federal funding before, and even if you have had it, quite frankly, there is some really good training referenced in the NOFO. We call it Grants 101 training, and there are 5 different modules that you can go through. It's free. You can do it at your own pace, but it gives you excellent background on what it means to receive federal funding and how to manage and report on your project. So this, there's, it talks about the laws and the regulations, the administrative requirements, the cost principles behind what can be eligible and what isn't eligible, risk management, etc. And also in the notice of award, there are the general terms and conditions that are associated with the award of funds to do the project. And you're going to want to take a look and be familiar with those requirements as well. So just some resources to help you pull an excellent application together. And best of luck to everyone who applies. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Great information, and Denise as well. Again, a lot to unpack there in terms of the process and, the details and the requirements, et cetera, as it relates to submission and or a proposal. So appreciate you taking the time to go through that in a pretty good level of detail. Of course, it's impossible to answer perhaps all questions when we're providing a presentation like this, but I think the hope in terms of desired outcome is that we certainly hit the high points and can address any of those questions that come up along the way. So much appreciated. So let's see here. We will officially open the Q&A here for this part of the presentation. I do see that we had another question come in. Doesn't look like it was specific to, the application process itself, but we'll go ahead and tackle this one. Nathan, did you have a chance to see this question in the chat yet? Let's see, it looks like this one came in from Amy. Yeah, I think this one I think came in from Amy Smith, who is one of our district conservationists in Live Oak.
Yeah, I'm not getting all the questions, Brian. So if you can see something that I can't, please just read it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share it with the group. See, I've got clients interested in CIG. One is interested in new technology, virtual fencing for grazing purposes, and the other is more so for research. They would like to see the benefits of cover crops on pasture. They've been working some with IFAS, University of Florida IFAS Extension, to get the project set up, but would like funding for the project. Are these a good fit for Florida CIG? Also, any recommendations in terms of the usual suspects, thinking about agencies or entities that could help with matching funds? I think, yeah, that's the only additional question that I see at the current time.
Well, again, anything grazing, pasture, soil health related could be a good proposal. I don't know, without more specifics and without seeing what all might come in, hard to say. I don't know if the other question about partners and who can submit, that might be more programmatic and eligibility in nature. So I don't know that I answered the question, but again, certainly can take a question on the side, or somebody who just wants to contact me, or Amy wants to contact me, we can chat more specifics.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion. I think there's probably, more to unpack here than just some of the highlights she provided in the question, but figured it would be useful, to share with the larger group as well, just, thinking about understanding and some of the other questions we've had in terms of really project fit, thinking about that CIG umbrella and potentially, what might fall within. Okay, we've got another question coming in here. Let's see, so this is from Gigi. If a corporate entity has one stockholder that is not financially disadvantaged, but two are, does that disqualify them from the HU category or rating? Amber, I think this might be a good one for you to take the lead on if you are still with us here. Entity.
I am here. I don't know if you hear me very well.
Yeah, you're coming through okay. Can you hear me all right?
I can. Okay, so Brian, I would imagine that we're looking at the grantee eligibility as an HU producer, or pardon me, not a producer, as an HU applicant. So it need to circle back to the no funding and at a section that discusses HU stats as a starting point. I don't have that notice of funding in front of me. We did tackle that a little bit in the last call. Now, when we think about EQIP in general, there is a established criteria of how to make that determination, and that could be the same for SIG, but I have to say, Brian, I would need to probably get back with you, Gigi, to get the details. They're just not at my tongue here. We do have some resources that will get you that information, help you to understand where you fit in the HU awardee category.
Okay. Yeah, and Gigi followed up that I guess the individual, makes less than 100,000 a year. Again, thinking about the AGI part, but of course, there's degrees of separation here, thinking about the adjusted gross income and the HU or historically underserved status. So I believe, let's see, I've got Gigi's contact information above as far as follow-up. So I think that's probably the right approach, Amber. We can do some additional due diligence on our end, and I will get you her contact info, and we can follow up after the call.
Sounds like a good plan. Thanks, Brian.
You bet. And great question. Thanks, Gigi. So any other questions out there? I'm not seeing anything here in the chat. I would just let folks know that if you haven't already provided your contact info as far as name, title, organization, email address, if you'd like to receive, again, a copy of today's slide deck, and I will also send the link to our NRCS website in terms of where this webinar recording will be posted. Of course, the one from back on May 4th is already there, and certainly much the same in terms of information, and certainly seeing some overlap in some of the questions that have been provided as well, which is great. So if you haven't done so, please make sure we do that here before the call wraps up as far as providing any contact info. So without seeing any other questions here and always wanting to be respectful and mindful of everybody's time, just a few words here to wrap up. Again, just on behalf of our state conservationist, Juan Hernandez, would say thank you to all for your time and interest. And not only, of course, in CIG or a conservation innovation grant opportunity here in Florida, but also in working or potentially working with NRCS. Again, you know, this is a very unique opportunity that has got some flexibilities in it that we don't see elsewhere in some of the other programs that we typically offer. So always great to take advantage of those, especially being innovative centric, thinking about, you know, innovation and, you know, technological advances, if you will, as it relates to natural resources and conservation. So again, would just say thank you for joining us today for this training. Certainly hope it has been valuable and education for all. Definitely want to thank all my colleagues here and their assistance for working through the presentation here and kind of the divide and conquer approach, which I think worked very well to cover the bases. And again, I know we couldn't cover it all in the time we had, but certainly felt like we were able to hit the high points and address those questions along the way with some additional follow-up as identified. So a couple of things real quick before we bring it to a close. As far as any updates in terms of either CIG or some of the other programs and initiatives that we offer here in Florida through USDA NRCS, did want to go ahead and share this website, our state website, for you to track and or even sign up to go ahead and receive additional resources and updates as they are made available. And then also in terms of closing remarks, again, you've got the portal here at the bottom, thinking about any additional information that may be provided any day in terms of the national CIG opportunities that we spoke to earlier, thinking about Classic or the on-farm trial CIG as well. So to wrap it up, I would just say again, thank you for attending, and please be sure to visit our state NRCS website for additional information, not just on CIG, but many of the other programs that we offer as well. And certainly hope that everybody has a wonderful day, and please do not hesitate to reach out with additional questions, and I will follow up with an email here in the next day or two to get out the slide deck and the specific link to our NRCS website where this webinar recording will be posted. So again, many thanks for your participation and the great questions, and hope everyone has a great day. Thank you very much.